The most powerful Korean billionaire in the room watched his mother get humiliated and did nothing. Owen Kong didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. At 38, he had built an empire that stretched from Seoul to Silicon Valley, controlling tech conglomerates, real estate portfolios, and enough political leverage to make presidents return his calls. His silence was more expensive than most people's screams. When he walked into a boardroom, stock prices moved. When he made a decision, entire industries pivoted. The media called him the Ice King of Asia. His competitors called him something far less flattering. But none of that mattered to him as much as the woman sitting beside him in the back of his Maybach, fidgeting with the clasp of her pearl necklace. Hannah Kong was 72 years old and still the most beautiful woman Owen had ever known. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her deep purple gown tailored perfectly to her petite frame. To anyone watching, she was the picture of grace and refinement, the kind of woman who had survived war, immigration, poverty, and triumph without losing her softness. But Owen saw what others missed. He saw her fingers tremble as she tried 3 times to fasten the necklace. He saw the way her eyes clouded with confusion when his driver took an unfamiliar route. He saw her glance down at the invitation in her lap, reading the same line over and over as if the words kept slipping away from her. Early-stage memory loss, the doctors had said. Progressive. Manageable for now. But Owen knew what for now meant. It meant time was running out. It meant the woman who had worked 3 jobs to put him through private school, who had never missed a single one of his violin recitals even when she was so exhausted she could barely stand, was slowly disappearing. And there was nothing his billions could do to stop it. He reached over and gently took the necklace from her hands. His mother looked up at him, startled, then grateful. He fastened the clasp without a word. She smiled, and for just a moment, she was fully present, fully herself. You look tired, Owen, she said softly in Korean, her native tongue always more comfortable than English. You work too much. He wanted to tell her that he worked because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant acknowledging that she was slipping away. Instead, he simply said, I'm fine, Iyama. The Maybach pulled up to the Grand Rothschild Hotel, where the International Children's Foundation Gala was being held. It was one of those elite charity events where the wealthy came to congratulate themselves for caring, where $1-million donations were made for tax write-offs and social media posts. Owen hated these gatherings, but his mother loved them. She believed in the goodness of people, even when they gave her every reason not to. So he came, every year, without fail. As they stepped out of the car, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Owen ignored them all, offering his arm to his mother as they walked the red carpet. Inside the hotel's grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast golden light over a sea of designer gowns and custom tuxedos. The room smelled of champagne, expensive perfume, and old money. Senators mingled with tech moguls. Fashion designers laughed with hedge fund managers. And at the center of it all, holding court like royalty, was Victoria Ashford. Victoria was what happened when British aristocracy married into Hong Kong's wealthiest shipping family. She was stunning, ruthless, and utterly devoid of empathy. Her charity work was legendary, but only because her PR team made sure of it. In reality, Victoria used philanthropy the way other people used weapons, to maintain power, to humiliate rivals, to remind everyone that she sat at the top of the social hierarchy and they did not. Owen had done business with her family before. He knew exactly who she was, and he knew his mother, in her gentle naivety, did not. They found their assigned table near the front of the ballroom. Owen pulled out his mother's chair, made sure she was comfortable, then took his seat beside her. Hannah was already smiling at the other guests, introducing herself in her soft, accented English. She was kind to everyone, genuinely, unconditionally kind. It was a quality Owen had long since abandoned in his rise to power, and sometimes he wondered if that made him a better businessman or just a worse son. The evening began with speeches, auction announcements, and the carefully choreographed performance of wealthy people pretending to care. Owen watched it all with detached amusement, his expression unreadable. He was good at wearing masks. He'd been doing it since he was 12 years old, standing in front of investors in a borrowed suit, pitching his first tech startup while his mother waited tables to keep their lights on. And then it happened. His mother stood up, slightly disoriented, and began walking toward what she thought was the restroom. But she was heading in the wrong direction, toward the service entrance where staff moved in and out with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Owen started to rise, to guide her back, but something made him stop. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the cold, calculated part of him that always wanted to see how people revealed themselves when they thought no one important was watching. Hannah paused near a side table, looking confused. A server tried to politely redirect her, but before he could, Victoria Ashford appeared, flanked by two of her equally vicious socialite friends. Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Oh dear," Victoria said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, her crisp British accent dripping with false concern. "Someone's lost. Darling, the staff entrance is that way." She gestured dismissively, as if Hannah were an inconvenience rather than a person. Hannah blinked, uncertain. "I'm sorry, I was just looking for." "The help always gets confused at these events," Victoria continued, turning to her friends with a theatrical sigh. "They really should be more careful about who they let wander around. Security is supposed to keep the service staff in their designated areas." One of her friends giggled. Another raised her champagne glass to hide a smirk. Hannah's face flushed with humiliation. She understood enough to know she was being mocked, but her confusion made her unable to defend herself. Owen watched from across the room as his mother's hands began to shake, as her eyes darted around looking for him, looking for safety, looking for anyone who might help her. No one moved. The powerful elites at the surrounding tables either didn't notice or pretended not to. A senator looked away. A tech CEO suddenly became very interested in his phone. These were people who claimed to champion the vulnerable, who gave millions to charity, who posted about kindness and compassion on social media. And not one of them said a word. Owen remained seated, his expression perfectly calm, his dark eyes locked on the scene unfolding before him. He could have stopped it with a single word. He could have walked over there and ended Victoria's cruelty in seconds. His presence alone would have silenced her. But he didn't move, because he wanted to see something. He wanted to know if there was a single person in this room full of wealth and power and supposed moral superiority who would do the right thing when it cost them something, when it risked their reputation, when it meant standing up to someone like Victoria Ashford. His mother stood there, small and fragile and utterly alone, while the woman who had given him everything was treated like she was nothing. And Owen Kong, the most powerful man in the room, did absolutely nothing. He just watched, and he waited. Samantha Hancock had been awake for 19 hours straight, and her shift wasn't even halfway done. Her feet ached in the two tight black flats she'd bought from a thrift store, the ones where the sole was starting to separate from the leather, but she couldn't afford to replace yet. Her lower back throbbed from bending, lifting, carrying, and standing in positions the human spine was never designed to hold for this long. But she didn't complain. She couldn't afford to complain. Not when this job at the Grand Rothschild was her third this week, and the only one that paid enough to keep the lights on in the studio apartment she shared with her aunt and 9-year-old cousin. She'd taken the bus for 2 hours to get here, standing the entire way because there were no seats, pressed between commuters who looked through her like she was invisible. Then she'd changed in the staff bathroom, pulling on the crisp white button-down shirt and black skirt that marked her as service, as background, as someone who existed only to refill glasses and clear plates and disappear when spoken to. The agency had called her at the last minute. Someone had quit. They needed bodies. She'd said yes before they even finished explaining the job, because saying no meant her cousin might not eat tomorrow. The ballroom was overwhelming. Samantha had cleaned offices, scrubbed hospital floors, and worked banquet halls before, but nothing compared to this level of wealth. The chandeliers alone probably cost more than she'd earn in her entire lifetime. Women walked past her wearing dresses that could have paid her rent for a year. Men laughed over glasses of champagne that cost more per bottle than her monthly grocery budget. And everywhere, the smell of expensive perfume and privilege hung in the air like something thick enough to choke on. She moved through the crowd with her tray of champagne glasses, keeping her eyes down, her posture perfect, her presence minimal. That was the trick to surviving these events. Be useful but invisible. Anticipate needs without being noticed. Exist in the spaces between conversations, filling glasses before they emptied, clearing plates before they were asked. The wealthy didn't like being reminded that other people had to work for them. They preferred the illusion that everything simply appeared and disappeared by magic. A woman in diamonds snapped her fingers at Samantha without looking at her. Samantha smiled, set down a fresh champagne flute, and moved on. Another guest backed into her without apologizing, nearly knocking the tray from her hands. She steadied it, apologized for being in the way, and kept moving. This was normal. This was fine. She'd learned years ago that survival meant swallowing indignity, that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her supervisor, a severe woman named Mrs. Chun who managed the hotel's event staff, caught her eye from across the room and gestured sharply toward the service entrance. Samantha nodded and headed that direction, weaving between tables of people who would never know her name. She was halfway there when she noticed the commotion near one of the side tables. An older Korean woman stood alone, looking lost and frightened. She was elegant, clearly a guest rather than staff, but something was wrong. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes darted around with confusion that Samantha recognized immediately because she'd seen it before in her own aunt, who sometimes forgot where she was or why she'd walked into a room. But what made Samantha slow her steps wasn't the woman's confusion. It was the three other women surrounding her, their voices loud and cruel, their laughter designed to carry. The one in the center was stunning in a way that felt weaponized. Her gown was white and perfect, her posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. She was speaking in a British accent, her words polite but her tone vicious. Someone really should keep better track of the help, the woman was saying, addressing her friends while looking directly at the confused older woman. It's embarrassing for everyone when they wander where they don't belong. Samantha's stomach turned. She knew exactly what was happening because she'd seen it 1,000 times before. The way rich people could be cruel and call it humor. The way they could humiliate someone and pretend it was an accident. The way they could destroy a person's dignity and then act surprised when someone called them out on it. She looked around, expecting someone to intervene. There were hundreds of people here, powerful people, people who gave speeches about compassion and donated millions to charity. Surely someone would step in. Surely someone would tell this woman to stop. But no one moved. Guests at nearby tables looked away or pretended not to notice. Servers kept walking. Even security stood motionless by the doors, trained to ignore anything that didn't involve physical threat. And in the corner, she noticed a man watching the whole scene with dark, calculating eyes. He was Korean, impeccably dressed, and something about his stillness suggested power. He could have stopped this with a single word. But he just sat there, observing like he was waiting for something. The British woman picked up a glass of red wine from a passing tray. Her smile widened. "You know what they say about confusion," she continued, swirling the wine dramatically. "It's contagious. We wouldn't want you spreading it to the actual guests." She raised the glass, and Samantha realized with horror what was about to happen. This woman was going to throw wine on an elderly, confused woman who couldn't defend herself. She was going to humiliate her publicly, violently, for entertainment. And everyone was going to let her. Samantha didn't think. She just moved. Her feet carried her forward before her brain could remind her of all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Before she could remember that she was nobody, that intervening meant losing this job, that she couldn't afford to lose this job. Before she could calculate the cost of what she was about to do, she stepped directly between the British woman and the elderly Korean woman, her body becoming a shield. The wine left the glass in a perfect arc, deep red and expensive, and hit Samantha square in the face and chest. It was cold and shocking, soaking through her white shirt, dripping down her face, staining everything it touched. The ballroom went silent. Samantha stood there, wine dripping from her chin, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Behind her, she felt the elderly woman's hand grip her arm, seeking safety. In front of her, the British woman's expression shifted from amused cruelty to genuine shock, then quickly to rage at being challenged. "How dare you?" the woman hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Samantha's voice came out steadier than she expected. "I know exactly who you are. You're someone who thinks cruelty is entertainment." The British woman's face flushed with fury. Her friends gasped. Several guests nearby pulled out their phones, already recording. Samantha knew this was the end. She'd just destroyed her only source of income. She'd just made an enemy of someone powerful. She'd just done the stupidest, most reckless thing she could have possibly done. But when she glanced back at the elderly woman's grateful, tear-filled eyes, she knew she'd do it again. Some things mattered more than survival. Some lines couldn't be uncrossed. And sometimes, when no one else would stand up, you had to be the one who did, even if it cost you everything. She just hoped her cousin would understand when they couldn't afford dinner tomorrow. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Victoria Ashford's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. "Security," she called out, her tone sharp and commanding. "Remove this woman immediately. She assaulted me." 2 security guards started moving toward Samantha, their faces blank and professional. Samantha's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline beginning to fade and the reality of what she'd just done crashing down on her. She'd be fired, probably arrested. The agency would blacklist her, and word would spread through every staffing company in the city. She'd never work an event like this again. Her mind raced through calculations of how long her savings would last, how she'd explain this to her aunt, whether her cousin would have to drop out of the after-school program they could barely afford anyway. But before the guards reached her, a voice stopped them cold. "Don't." It was a single word, spoken quietly, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Everyone in the immediate vicinity turned toward the source. The man Samantha had noticed watching earlier was now standing, and something about the way he moved made the entire room shift its attention. He walked toward them with measured steps, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes fixed on Victoria with an intensity that made even her falter. "Owen?" Victoria said, her voice suddenly uncertain, the cruelty draining from her face and being replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "This staff member just—" "I saw what happened," Owen said, still approaching. His accent was American but carried traces of Korean beneath it, and his voice had the kind of quiet power that came from never having to shout. "Everyone saw what happened." He stopped a few feet from Samantha, and for the first time since stepping between Victoria and the elderly woman, Samantha looked directly at him. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she'd realized. Tall, perfectly composed, with a face that revealed nothing and eyes that seemed to see everything. But what struck her most was the way he looked at his mother, who was still gripping Samantha's arm, and the flash of something raw that crossed his features before he locked it away again. "Iyama," he said softly, switching to Korean. "Are you hurt?" The elderly woman shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, but this young woman. She protected me. Owen." She stepped in front of me when no one else would. Owen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned back to Victoria, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. You threw wine at my mother, he said. Each word was precise, controlled, deadly. Victoria's face went pale. I didn't know she was your mother. Owen, I thought she was. You thought she was what? Owen's voice remained quiet, but there was steel beneath it now. Someone disposable? Someone who didn't matter because she looked confused? Someone you could humiliate for your own amusement? The guests who had been recording on their phones were now very still, their cameras forgotten. Everyone within earshot had gone completely silent. Samantha realized she was watching someone's social execution happen in real time, and she understood with sudden clarity that the man standing beside her wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of powerful that made other powerful people nervous. I didn't realize, Victoria stammered, her British composure completely shattered. If I had known who she was, I never would have. That's the problem, Owen interrupted. You would never have done this to someone you thought mattered. But you felt perfectly comfortable doing it to someone you deemed beneath you. He paused, letting that sink in. This staff member showed more character in 30 seconds than you've shown in your entire life. She risked her job to protect a stranger. What have you ever risked for anyone? Victoria's friends had already melted away, suddenly very interested in other parts of the ballroom. Victoria herself looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. Several guests were nodding in agreement with Owen's words. The phones had come back out, but now they were recording Victoria's humiliation instead of Samantha's intervention. Owen turned to the security guards who had stopped mid-approach. You can go. There's no threat here. Then he addressed Mrs. Chun, the supervisor Samantha recognized from earlier. This woman is no longer working this event. I'm taking responsibility for her. Mrs. Chun looked confused but nodded quickly. Of course, Mr. Kong. Whatever you need. Samantha's mind was reeling. Mr. Kong. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Owen Kong, the Korean billionaire CEO who controlled half of Asia's tech industry and had his fingers in markets across the globe. The man whose business decisions made headlines, whose silence at negotiations was legendary, whose wealth was so vast it became abstract. And she just accidentally saved his mother while he watched the whole thing happen. Owen finally turned to look at her directly, and Samantha felt the full weight of his attention. It was like being studied by something ancient and powerful, something that could build you up or tear you down with equal ease. What's your name? He asked. Samantha, she managed, her voice barely steady. Samantha Hancock. Ms. Hancock, he said, and something in the way he used her name felt like being seen for the first time in years. You're covered in wine because you protected my mother. Your uniform is ruined. You've probably lost your job. And you did all of that knowing exactly what it would cost you. He paused. Why? Samantha looked at him, then at his mother, then back at him. The truth came out before she could think better of it. Because someone had to, she said simply. Because she was scared and alone and no one else was going to help her. Because I've been invisible my whole life, and I know what it feels like when people look through you like you don't exist. Because it was the right thing to do, and sometimes that's the only reason you need. Something shifted in Owen's expression, so subtle she almost missed it. Respect, maybe, or recognition, or something else she couldn't name. You're right, he said quietly. Someone had to. He glanced around the ballroom, his gaze sweeping over the hundreds of guests who had done nothing. I wanted to see if anyone would. I sat there and watched because I needed to know if there was a single person in this room who still had a conscience, who would act even when it cost them something. His eyes came back to her. You were the only one. Samantha didn't know what to say to that. The admission was both brutal and honest, and she realized he'd been testing them all. Testing the very people who claimed to be charitable, compassionate, morally superior. And every single one of them had failed except her. Owen reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. He handed it to Samantha, and she took it with wine-stained fingers. Be at this address tomorrow morning at 9, he said. My mother needs a caretaker, someone who will protect her when I can't. Someone with actual courage instead of just credentials. He paused. The pay will be more than fair. The work will be demanding. And you'll be entering a world that will try very hard to make you regret tonight. But if you're interested, come. Samantha stared at the card. It was heavy, expensive, with an address in a part of the city where people like her didn't go. This was insane. This was her life changing in real time. This was opportunity and danger wrapped up together. I'll be there, she heard herself say. Owen nodded once, then offered his arm to his mother. Hannah took it gratefully, but before they left, she reached out and squeezed Samantha's hand. Thank you, she whispered in accented English. Thank you for seeing me. Samantha watched them walk away, the crowd parting for them like water. Victoria had already disappeared, probably to start damage control on whatever videos were already spreading across social media. The other guests were returning to their conversations. The drama over, already moving on to the next entertainment. But Samantha stood there in her wine-stained uniform, holding a business card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and knew with absolute certainty that her life had just split into before and after. She'd woken up this morning exhausted and invisible and barely surviving. She'd go to sleep tonight still exhausted, still poor, but no longer invisible. Tomorrow she'd walk into a world she didn't understand, working for a man who was as dangerous as he was powerful, protecting a woman who reminded her why kindness still mattered. She looked down at the card one more time, then slipped it into her pocket. Whatever came next, she'd chosen it. And that alone was more power than she'd ever had before. The address on Owen Kang's business card led to a penthouse that occupied the entire top 3 floors of the Millennium Tower. The kind of building where doormen wore better suits than most executives, and the lobby looked like a museum. Samantha had arrived 20 minutes early because being late wasn't an option, and she'd spent those 20 minutes sitting on a bench across the street, trying to convince herself she hadn't made a terrible mistake. Her aunt had been skeptical when Samantha explained what happened. Her cousin had been excited, asking if she'd get to meet a real billionaire. Neither of them fully understood what Samantha was walking into, and truthfully, neither did she. The doorman had her name on a list. The private elevator required a keycard that he provided. And when the doors opened directly into Owen's penthouse, Samantha stepped into a world so far removed from her reality that it felt like crossing into another dimension. The space was massive, all floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than cars, and art on the walls that looked like it belonged in galleries. Everything was clean lines and muted colors, sophisticated and cold and impersonal. It felt like a place designed to impress rather than to live in, and Samantha wondered if Owen actually spent time here or if it was just another asset he owned. A woman in her 50s appeared, dressed in a crisp gray suit, her hair pulled back severely. She introduced herself as Mrs. Park, the house manager, and her expression made it clear she had opinions about this arrangement that she was professional enough not to voice. She handed Samantha a tablet with an extensive list of protocols, expectations, and rules. There were sections on privacy, confidentiality, appropriate conduct, and emergency procedures. It was overwhelming and slightly terrifying. Mr. Kong is in meetings until this evening, Mrs. Park said, her tone neutral but not warm. I'll show you to Mrs. Kang's suite. She's expecting you. They walked through hallways lined with art Samantha didn't recognize but suspected was priceless. Past rooms she glimpsed only briefly. A library, a gym, what looked like a private office with monitors covering an entire wall. Finally, they reached a door that Mrs. Park opened to reveal a suite that was completely different from the rest of the penthouse. Where everything else was cold and modern, Hannah's space was warm. There were plants everywhere, photographs in frames, watercolor paintings of Korean landscapes, soft blankets draped over chairs. It smelled like jasmine tea and felt lived in, loved, human. And sitting by the window with a book in her lap was Hannah herself, who looked up when they entered and smiled with genuine delight. "You came," she said, standing carefully. She was wearing comfortable clothes today, soft pants and a cardigan, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. "I worried you might not." "Of course I came," Samantha said, and found herself smiling back despite her nervousness. Mrs. Park went through a series of instructions: meal times, medication schedules, emergency contacts, then left them alone. The moment the door closed, Hannah's formal posture relaxed. "She thinks I'm fragile," Hannah said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Mrs. Park. She means well, but she treats me like I might break. Owen does too, sometimes, though he tries to hide it." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please sit. Tell me about yourself. I want to know who was brave enough to stand up to Victoria Ashford." Over the next hour, Samantha found herself talking more freely than she had in years. Hannah had that rare quality of making you feel heard, really heard, asking questions that weren't just polite but genuinely curious. She wanted to know about Samantha's aunt, her cousin, where she'd grown up, what she dreamed about when she let herself dream. And in return, Hannah shared stories about immigrating to America with nothing, about working her way through night school while Owen was young, about the pride and terror of watching her son build an empire. "He's a good man," Hannah said quietly, looking out the window at the city below. "But he's forgotten how to be soft. He thinks power means never showing weakness, never letting anyone close. I watch him turn harder every year, and I don't know how to reach him anymore." She turned back to Samantha. "That's why what you did mattered so much. You reminded him that strength doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice." Samantha didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat in comfortable silence until Hannah asked if Samantha liked tea, and then they moved to the small kitchen area in the suite where Hannah insisted on making it herself, despite Samantha's protests that she was there to help. "You're here to keep me company," Hannah corrected gently, "to be patient when I forget things, to help me feel less alone. That's different from being staff." The days that followed developed a rhythm. Samantha arrived each morning at 9, spent her days with Hannah, and left each evening at 6. They took walks through the private garden on the building's terrace. They looked through photo albums while Hannah told stories about each picture, sometimes repeating herself, sometimes losing the thread of memory mid-sentence. They cooked together, Hannah teaching Samantha traditional Korean recipes, laughing when Samantha couldn't get the spice levels right. And slowly, carefully, Samantha learned the contours of Hannah's condition. The things that confused her, the moments of clarity, the ways to redirect when she became anxious. But she also learned about the world she'd entered. Owen's penthouse was a fortress, but it was also under constant surveillance. There were security cameras, background checks on anyone who entered, and protocols for everything. Mrs. Park watched Samantha with undisguised suspicion, clearly waiting for her to do something wrong. And there were others, assistants, drivers, lawyers, who moved through the space with efficiency, treating Samantha with the kind of polite dismissal reserved for people who didn't matter. Owen himself was rarely there. Samantha saw him in passing, usually late at night when she was leaving or early in the morning when he was heading out. They didn't speak beyond brief acknowledgments. He'd nod, she'd nod back, and that was it. But she was aware of him constantly, the way you're aware of a storm on the horizon. His presence shaped everything even when he wasn't there. The staff moved differently when he was home. The energy in the penthouse changed, and Hannah brightened whenever she heard his voice, then dimmed again when he had to leave. 3 weeks into the job, Samantha was helping Hannah get ready for bed when the older woman suddenly gripped her hand. "My son is lonely," Hannah said, her voice clear and certain. "He doesn't know it because he's forgotten what connection feels like. He thinks being needed is the same as being loved. He thinks control is the same as security." She looked at Samantha with eyes that were suddenly sharp, fully present. "You scare him. That's why he avoids you." You did something he couldn't do, and it reminded him of who he used to be before he decided feelings were weaknesses. Before Samantha could respond, Hannah's expression clouded again, the moment of clarity passing. But the words stayed with Samantha long after she'd left for the night. It was past midnight when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something made her pick up. Ms. Hancock. Owen's voice was unmistakable. I need you to come back to the penthouse. Now. Her heart jumped. Is Hannah okay? She's fine, but we need to talk, and it can't wait. 20 minutes later, Samantha was back in the elevator, her mind racing through possibilities. When the doors opened, Owen was standing in the living room, still in his suit but with his tie loosened, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. There was something raw in his expression, something almost vulnerable. I had you investigated, he said without preamble. After the gala, full background check, financial history, everything. I needed to know who you were before I let you near my mother. Samantha's stomach dropped. She knew what he must have found. The evictions, the debts, the struggle, the desperation. Her life laid bare in a file somewhere. I know you're poor, Owen continued. I know you work 3 jobs just to survive. I know your credit score and your rent history, and that you share a studio apartment with your aunt and her daughter. He paused. I also know that in the past 5 years, you've returned 4 wallets you found with cash still inside. You've given money to strangers on the street even when you had nothing to spare. You've volunteered at a shelter on your days off. You've never stolen, never cheated, never taken advantage of anyone despite having every reason to. He took a step closer, and Samantha realized he was looking at her the way he'd looked at her at the gala. Like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Everyone in my life wants something from me, he said quietly. Money, access, influence, connection. Everyone has an angle. Everyone is performing. But you stepped in front of wine meant for my mother knowing you'd lose your only income that night. You protected a stranger when it cost you everything. And you've spent 3 weeks caring for her with more patience and kindness than staff I've paid twice your salary. His voice dropped even lower. Why? What do you want from this? Samantha met his eyes and told him the truth. I want your mother to feel safe. That's all. That's everything. Something in Owen's expression cracked, just slightly, before he locked it down again. But she'd seen it. The loneliness his mother had mentioned. The isolation of being powerful enough that everyone wanted something from you and no one just wanted you. My world is dangerous, he said. There are people who would hurt my mother to get to me. People who see kindness as weakness and compassion as opportunity. If you stay, you'll be pulled into that. You'll become a target simply by proximity. Then teach me how to survive it, Samantha said. Owen studied her for a long moment, and something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. 2 people who understood what it meant to protect something more valuable than yourself. All right, he finally said. But from now on, you're not just a caretaker. You're part of this household, which means you follow my security protocols, you report anything unusual, and you trust me when I tell you something is dangerous. He paused. And you stop leaving at 6. You live here now. There's a suite prepared for you. Mrs. Park will handle the logistics of moving your things. I can't just. Your aunt and cousin too, Owen interrupted. There's space. And frankly, if you're here, they're safer as well. This building has security your apartment doesn't. I'm not asking, Ms. Hancock. I'm telling you how this works now. Samantha wanted to argue, but she saw the logic. Saw the protection he was offering. Saw that this was how he showed care, through control, through planning, through eliminating variables. It wasn't soft, but it was real. Okay, she said. Owen nodded once, then turned to leave. But he paused at the doorway. Thank you, he said without looking back. For seeing her. For protecting her. For being the person I should have been that night. Then he was gone, and Samantha stood alone in the massive living room. realizing her life had just changed again. She'd gone from invisible to essential in 3 weeks. From surviving to protected. From outsider to insider. She just hoped she could handle what came next. Moving into the penthouse changed everything in ways Samantha hadn't anticipated. Her aunt cried when she saw the guest suite that was larger than their entire apartment had been. Her cousin ran through the halls with pure joy, marveling at having her own bedroom with an actual door that closed. And Samantha found herself existing in 2 worlds simultaneously. The world where she cared for Hannah with tenderness and patience, and the world where she was learning to navigate the dangerous politics of extreme wealth. Owen had been right about one thing. She became visible the moment she moved in. And visibility, she quickly learned, made you a target. Started small. Whispers among the staff about the maid who'd gotten too close, who'd somehow manipulated her way into the household. Mrs. Park's disapproval hardened into something colder. Anonymous messages started appearing on social media, calling her a gold digger, questioning her motives, suggesting she'd staged the whole gala incident for attention. Samantha ignored them because engaging would only make it worse. And besides, she had Hannah to focus on. But then the threats escalated. A package arrived at the penthouse addressed to her with no return label. Security intercepted it, and Owen's team discovered a dead rat inside with a note that read, "Know your place." Samantha's cousin started getting followed home from her new school by men in dark cars who never approached but made their presence known. And one afternoon, while Samantha and Hannah were having tea in the garden terrace, someone hacked the building speakers and played a recording of Samantha's voice. Except she'd never said the things in the recording. They'd used AI to make her sound like she was admitting to scheming her way into Owen's life, to targeting Hannah for money, to being exactly what the rumors claimed. Hannah heard it. She looked at Samantha with confusion and hurt, her memory issues making it hard to distinguish truth from manipulation. And Samantha watched 3 weeks of trust nearly crumble in 3 minutes. "I didn't say those things," Samantha said quietly after Owen's security team shut down the hack. "Someone made it sound like me, but those aren't my words. I would never." "I know," Hannah interrupted, her voice shaking but certain. "I know who you are, Samantha. I forget many things now, but I don't forget kindness. I don't forget the way you looked at me that night at the gala, like I mattered. People can fake voices, but they can't fake that." Still, the damage had been done. Hannah was rattled. Samantha's aunt was terrified and talking about moving back to their old apartment despite the danger. And Samantha herself was starting to wonder if staying was worth putting everyone she loved at risk. Owen called an emergency meeting that evening. His entire security team was present, along with his head of operations and someone he introduced only as the person who handles problems I can't solve legally. The room felt tense and dangerous, and Samantha realized she was seeing the side of Owen's world that most people never witnessed. The machinery behind the power, the people who made threats disappear. "We've traced the harassment back to 3 sources," the security chief said, pulling up information on multiple screens. Victoria Ashford's PR team, a business rival of Mr. Kang's who sees Ms. Hancock as potential leverage, and a coalition of socialites who view her presence as a threat to the established social order. "Victoria's still angry about the gala," Owen said, his voice flat and cold. "She lost social standing, several board positions, and 3 major sponsorships after the video went viral. She blames Samantha for her humiliation." "She should blame herself," Samantha said before she could stop herself. Owen looked at her, and something almost like approval flickered across his face. "Agreed. But people like Victoria never accept responsibility for their own cruelty. They always find someone else to punish." The problem solver leaned forward, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. "We can make this go away, Mr. Kong. Completely. We have leverage on everyone involved. Victoria's family has financial irregularities we could expose. Your business rival has personal indiscretions that would destroy his marriage and his reputation. The socialites have skeletons that would make the harassment look like nothing. One word from you and they all disappear. Samantha watched Owen consider this. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the cold assessment of options, the part of him that had built an empire by being willing to destroy anyone who threatened what he cared about. This was the man who terrified boardrooms and made politicians nervous. This was the man who won by being more ruthless than his enemies. "Do it," he said. "No," Samantha interrupted. Everyone in the room turned to look at her like she'd lost her mind. You didn't contradict Owen Kong in a meeting about security. You didn't question his decisions about protecting his household. But Samantha met his gaze and refused to look away. "If you destroy them, you prove them right," she said. "You prove that I'm someone who needs protection through power and fear. You prove that we're exactly what they think we are, people who solve problems by crushing anyone who challenges us." "They're threatening you," Owen said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They're threatening my mother. They hacked into my building and tried to destroy your reputation. You think they deserve mercy? I think they deserve consequences, not annihilation," Samantha said. "There's a difference between justice and revenge. And I think you're angry enough right now that you can't see which one you're choosing." The room went completely silent. No one spoke to Owen like that. No one questioned his judgment or implied he wasn't in control of his emotions. Samantha saw his jaw tighten, saw his hands flex once before going still, and she knew she just crossed a line that might get her thrown out of this penthouse and back into the world she'd briefly escaped. But then Owen did something unexpected. He dismissed everyone except Samantha. When the room cleared, he stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His back was to her, his posture rigid with tension. "You have no idea what these people are capable of," he said finally. "You think this is about social standing and hurt feelings. It's not. Victoria comes from a family that's destroyed lives for less. My business rival has connections to people who make problems disappear permanently. And those socialites collectively control enough influence to make sure you never work, never rent an apartment, never exist in any space that matters again. You think refusing to fight back makes you noble. I think it makes you a target." "Maybe," Samantha acknowledged. "But if you crush them the way you're planning to, what does that make you? You sat at that gala and watched because you wanted to see if anyone still had a conscience. You wanted to know if there was anyone who'd do the right thing even when it cost them something. Well, I'm asking you the same question now. Do you still have one? Or have you spent so long believing that power means control that you've forgotten there are other ways to be strong?" Owen turned to face her, and the expression on his face was something she'd never seen before. Anger, yes, but beneath it was something raw and painful and almost desperate. "My mother is the only person in this world I love," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The only person who sees me as something other than a tool or a threat or an opportunity." And watching her get confused, watching her memory slip away piece by piece, knowing there's nothing I can do to stop it, he stopped, visibly trying to regain control. "When those people threatened you, they threatened her safety. They threatened the one person who makes her feel protected and cared for. And you're asking me to show restraint when every instinct I have is screaming to eliminate the threat completely." Samantha understood then. This wasn't about her at all. This was about a man who'd spent his entire life building walls to protect the one thing that mattered. And those walls were crumbling because you couldn't protect someone from their own mind deteriorating. You couldn't buy or intimidate or control away diseases like memory loss. All his power was useless against the thing he feared most, so he was redirecting that fear into something he could control, destroying anyone who dared threaten what little security he could still provide. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. "Your mother doesn't need you to destroy people for her," Samantha said gently. "She needs you to be the person she raised. The person who knows the difference between strength and cruelty. The person who can be powerful without being feared." "I don't know how to be that person anymore," Owen admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice was staggering. Then let me help you remember, Samantha said. They stood there in silence, watching the city lights below, two people from completely different worlds trying to figure out how to protect someone they both loved without losing themselves in the process. And slowly, Samantha watched something shift in Owen's posture, saw the rigid control start to ease. What do you suggest? He finally asked. We press charges for the harassment, Samantha said. Legal, public, transparent. We let the courts handle it instead of handling it ourselves. We show everyone that we're not afraid, but we're also not monsters. And we trust that doing the right thing will matter more than doing the powerful thing. Owen was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Change of plans, he told his security chief. We're going legal. I want everything documented, every threat cataloged, every law they broke recorded. And then I want lawyers, not leverage. We do this the right way. He paused. Yes, I'm sure. Make it happen. When he hung up, he looked at Samantha with something that might have been respect or might have been something deeper. You're either very brave or very foolish, he said. Maybe both, Samantha admitted. But I'd rather be foolish and kind than smart and cruel. My mother said something similar once, Owen said quietly. When I was young and just starting to build my company, I was ruthless even then, willing to do whatever it took to win. She told me that true power isn't making people fear you. It's making people want to follow you even when they don't have to. He looked back out at the city. I forgot that somewhere along the way. I forgot a lot of things. It's not too late to remember, Samantha said. Owen didn't respond, but something had changed between them. Some wall had come down, some distance had closed. They weren't employer and employee anymore, or protector and protected. They were two people trying to navigate an impossible situation with their humanity intact. 2 days later, Victoria Ashford and the others involved were arrested on harassment charges. The evidence was overwhelming, and because Owen had chosen the legal route instead of personal destruction, the media framed it as justice rather than revenge. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Samantha received messages of support from people she'd never met. And Victoria, facing actual consequences for her cruelty, issued a public apology that seemed almost genuine. But the real change happened in the penthouse. Owen started coming home earlier. He spent more time with his mother, learning patience, relearning how to be present instead of just protective. And he started talking to Samantha, really talking about more than just security protocols and schedules. Late one night, after Hannah had gone to bed, Owen found Samantha in the library. Thank you, he said, for stopping me from becoming the monster I was about to be. You were never going to be a monster, Samantha said. You were just scared. And fear makes us all consider things we'd never actually do. Maybe, Owen said, but having someone who believes you're better than your worst impulses, that matters more than I knew. He left before she could respond. But Samantha sat there in the quiet library and realized that somewhere in the chaos and danger and fear, something had fundamentally shifted. Owen was learning to trust again, to be vulnerable again, to believe that power could coexist with compassion. And Samantha was learning that protection wasn't always about stepping in front of danger. Sometimes it was about stopping someone you cared about from becoming the danger themselves. The invitation arrived 6 months after the night Samantha had stepped between cruelty and kindness. Heavy cardstock, gold-embossed lettering, the kind of formal elegance that announced importance before you even read the words. It was for the International Children's Foundation Gala, the same event where everything had changed. And this time, Samantha's name wasn't on a staff list. It was on the guest list, right beside Owen and Hannah Kong. She stood in her suite, her actual suite now, not temporary housing but a space that had become home, holding the invitation and feeling the weight of what it represented. A year ago, she'd been invisible, serving champagne to people who looked through her. Now she was being invited to sit among them as an equal. The irony wasn't lost on her. You don't have to go, Owen said from the doorway. She'd gotten used to the way he appeared quietly, no longer the distant figure who avoided interaction but someone who sought out her company, who valued her opinion, who had slowly become something she didn't have words for yet. "Yes, I do," Samantha said, turning to face him. "Because if I don't, it means they still have power over me. It means I'm still afraid of being seen." Owen studied her with that intense focus that used to intimidate her but now felt like being truly understood. He was different than he'd been a year ago. Still powerful, still commanding, but there was warmth beneath the control now. Humanity beneath the authority. He smiled more, especially around his mother. He laughed occasionally, usually at something Hannah said that caught him off guard. And he'd stopped treating kindness like weakness. "Then we'll go together," he said. "All three of us." The night of the gala, Samantha stood in front of her mirror and barely recognized herself. The dress Owen had insisted on buying her was deep emerald green, elegant and understated but clearly expensive. Her hair was styled professionally, her makeup done by someone who actually knew what they were doing. She looked like she belonged in that ballroom, and the realization was both empowering and slightly terrifying. Her aunt and cousin were staying in the penthouse for the evening, her cousin practically vibrating with excitement about having the whole place to themselves. Her aunt had pulled Samantha aside before she left. "I'm proud of you," she'd said quietly. "Not because you're wearing a fancy dress or going to a fancy party, but because you're still you. All of this," she gestured at the penthouse, the life they now lived, "it hasn't changed who you are. You're still the girl who gave her last $5 to a homeless man even when we needed it for groceries. You're still the person who sees people instead of just walking past them. Don't ever lose that." Now, arriving at the Grand Rothschild Hotel for the second time, everything felt different. The same red carpet, the same cameras, the same ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and excessive wealth on display. But this time, Samantha walked in on Owen's arm with Hannah on his other side, and people noticed. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out questions. And instead of being invisible, Samantha was suddenly very, very seen. The stares started immediately. Some were curious, some disapproving, some openly hostile. Samantha recognized several faces from the videos that had gone viral after last year's incident. She saw the socialites who'd stood by and watched. She saw the senator who'd looked away. She saw all the people who'd chosen silence over conscience. And she met their eyes without flinching. They found their table, and Samantha noticed it was in a different location this year. More prominent, more visible, a clear statement of status. Owen pulled out both chairs, first for his mother, then for Samantha, and the gesture felt protective and affirming at once. "They're all watching you," Hannah whispered, her eyes bright with amusement. She was having a good day, sharp and present, and Samantha was grateful for it. "Half of them are trying to figure out who you are. The other half already know and wish they didn't. Let them watch," Samantha said quietly. "I have nothing to hide." The evening proceeded with speeches and auction announcements, the same performance of wealth and charity as before. But this time, Samantha noticed things she'd missed when she was working. She saw the way money moved without anyone actually caring about the causes they claimed to support. She saw the networking disguised as philanthropy, the status games played over cocktails, the way power was traded like currency. And then she saw Victoria Ashford. Victoria looked smaller somehow, though she was still beautiful, still impeccably dressed. But there was something diminished about her presence, a wariness that hadn't been there before. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and Samantha watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions. Recognition, shame, anger, something that might have been regret. Victoria approached their table, and Samantha felt Owen tense beside her. His hand moved toward hers under the table, not quite touching but close enough to offer support if she needed it. Hannah simply watched with calm interest, as if this were a play she'd been waiting to see unfold. "Ms. Hancock," Victoria said, her British accent still crisp but lacking its former edge. "I wondered if I might have a moment of your time." "Of course," Samantha said, standing. Owen started to rise as well, but she touched his shoulder gently. It's okay. They walked to a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from listening ears and judging eyes. Victoria looked at her for a long moment before speaking. I owe you an apology, she said finally. A real one, not the public statement my lawyers drafted. What I did to Mrs. Kong was inexcusable. What I tried to do to you afterward was worse. I spent 6 months in therapy trying to understand why I've spent my entire life treating people like they're disposable. And I still don't have a good answer except that I was raised to believe cruelty was power and kindness was weakness. She paused. You proved me wrong. You stood up when no one else would, and you did it knowing exactly what it would cost you. That's real strength. What I had was just meanness disguised as confidence. Samantha studied her, looking for signs of manipulation or performance, but all she saw was exhaustion and something that looked like genuine remorse. I appreciate you saying that, Samantha said carefully, but the person you really need to apologize to is Mrs. Kong. I know, Victoria said. I was hoping. Would she be willing to hear it? Samantha looked back at their table where Hannah sat talking with Owen, animated and happy. She thought about all the conversations they'd had over the past months about forgiveness, about how holding on to anger only hurt the person carrying it, about how everyone deserved a chance to be better than their worst moment. I'll ask her, Samantha said. But Victoria, if you're doing this for publicity or social rehabilitation, don't. She deserves better than that. I'm doing this because I can't sleep at night, Victoria said quietly, because every time I close my eyes, I see the look on her face when I humiliated her, and I hate myself for being that person. I want to be different. I want to be better. I just don't know how. Start by meaning it, Samantha said, and then keep meaning it every day afterward. Victoria nodded, thanked her, and walked away. Samantha returned to the table where Owen immediately searched her face for signs of distress. I'm fine, she assured him. Actually, I'm better than fine. I think something real just happened. Later in the evening, after Victoria had offered a tearful, genuine apology to Hannah that ended with Hannah embracing her and telling her that forgiveness was always available to those who truly sought it, the foundation's director took the stage for announcements. Before we continue with tonight's auction, he said, I'd like to recognize someone who reminded us all what this foundation is supposed to represent. Last year, an act of courage occurred in this very room that many of you witnessed. Samantha Hancock, a woman working staff that evening, stepped between cruelty and an innocent person without hesitation. She risked everything to protect someone she didn't know, and in doing so, she showed us what real charity looks like. Samantha felt her face flush as the spotlight found her. The ballroom erupted in applause, and she wanted to disappear into the floor. Ms. Hancock has since become a voice for the vulnerable in ways that extend far beyond that single moment, the director continued. She's been working with our foundation to develop programs that support service workers, that provide education and opportunities for those living in poverty, that address the systemic issues that keep people invisible. And tonight, we're honored to announce that she'll be joining our board of directors. Samantha's head snapped up. She looked at Owen, who was smiling in a way she'd never seen before. Proud, genuine, unguarded. You knew about this, she said. I recommended you, he admitted. They made the decision themselves. The director gestured for her to come to the stage. Samantha stood on shaking legs, walked through the applause, and accepted a position she'd never imagined having. Standing at that podium, looking out at a sea of wealthy, powerful people, she thought about the girl who'd taken 3 buses to get here a year ago. The girl who'd been invisible, disposable, struggling just to survive. That girl was still inside her. But now she had a voice to speak for all the others like her who were still invisible. Thank you, she said into the microphone. But I need you all to understand something. What I did wasn't heroic. It was basic human decency. The fact that it seemed remarkable says more about what we've normalized than it does about me. There are people in this room right now, working the kitchens, serving your drinks, cleaning your tables, who are invisible to most of you. They have names, families, dreams, struggles. They matter. And if this position means anything, it means I get to make sure you start seeing them. The applause that followed felt different, more thoughtful, more aware. After the speeches ended and the evening returned to its regular programming, Samantha found herself approached by person after person. Some wanted to thank her. Some wanted to share their own stories of being overlooked or dismissed. Some wanted to volunteer for the programs she'd mentioned. And some just wanted to be seen by someone who actually looked. Near midnight, as the gala was winding down, Samantha stood on the terrace overlooking the city with Owen and Hannah. His mother was tired but happy, leaning against her son's shoulder with contentment. "You've changed everything," Owen said quietly to Samantha. "Not just for my mother or for me, but for everyone in that room tonight. You made them uncomfortable, and discomfort is the only thing that creates real change." "I just told the truth," Samantha said. "That's exactly why it worked," Owen replied. A year ago, Samantha had been a maid. Tonight, she sat on a charitable foundations board. But the real transformation wasn't in titles or status or wealth. It was in the knowledge that one act of courage could ripple outward in ways you never anticipated. That standing up when everyone else sat down could shift the entire room. That power wasn't about control or fear. It was about choosing who you protected and what you stood for, even when silence would have been safer. Hannah squeezed both their hands, present and aware and proud. "This is what I always hoped for," she said softly. "Not the money or the success or the recognition, just people remembering how to be kind, how to see each other, how to choose love over fear." She looked at her son. "You've remembered, Owen. Finally, you've remembered." Owen's eyes were bright with emotion he no longer tried to hide. He pulled his mother close, then reached for Samantha's hand and held it without hesitation or pretense. "Thank you," he said to Samantha, "for teaching me how to be human again." They stood there together, three people who'd found each other in a moment of crisis and built something real from it. Family, not bound by blood or obligation, but by choice, by courage, by the decision to protect what mattered instead of what was profitable. And in the ballroom below, servers moved through the crowd with champagne and dignity, a little more visible than they'd been before, a little more valued. One small shift in a system that needed 1,000 more. But it was a start. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person willing to step forward. One person refusing to look away. One person choosing kindness when cruelty would have been easier. The maid had become a queen. But more importantly, the queen still remembered what it felt like to be a maid. And that made all the difference.